Stimulus negotiations are coming down to the wire on Capitol Hill, where lawmakers are scrambling to pass a COVID relief package and government funding bill. Chief Congressional Correspondent Nancy Cordes has been following these talks closely, and she is here to give us an update. So, Nancy, since we talked yesterday, I know this is a game of inches, so have the two sides inched any closer to an agreement?
They claim they have. I mean, every time we talk to them, Anne Marie, they say they're so close to this deal. They are just working out some final details. The reality is that it's kind of like whack-a-mole, as one senator put it yesterday. Every time they fix one issue, another one pops up. And it's not surprising because this is a $900 billion bill, and they're making a lot of little decisions about where the money goes, who gets it, how much, and on, how these programs are structured. Just take the stimulus checks, for instance. You know, this is just one portion of this bill. Who gets them? Is it people who make up to $75,000 a year? If you lowered the income threshold, could you then give out more money? How about the unemployment benefits? Is it $300 a week? Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. How long are you going to give it out to people? For 12 weeks, 14 weeks? All of these little discussions are taking place, and when it comes to every single one of them, the two parties have a little bit of a different view. So they're continuing to work through it. Nobody feels that the deal is in jeopardy, but it's just taking longer than they had hoped. And the problem is that they are attaching it to a bill to fund the government, and the lights go out in the federal government at midnight tonight. So if the House and the Senate don't pass this pair of bills today, we are now looking at the possibility of a short-term government shutdown over the weekend until they can get this all done. It wouldn't be as huge of a problem if the government were shut down a couple days over the weekend rather than during the week, but still, it's not optimal, and they're hoping that they can avoid it somehow.
So we've talked before about how a large portion of the money is coming from monies that had not been spent, particularly money that was allocated to the Federal Reserve. The Fed chair was not happy about that. Is there a concern that this may be a little bit of robbing Peter to pay Paul?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the Fed chair, as you mentioned, made no secret of the fact that he wanted to be able to have that money in reserve. That was the whole point of it. But by essentially cutting those programs off, what the Treasury Secretary, Stephen Mnuchin, was saying to the next administration, the Biden administration, is, hey, you know, if you want to keep this going, you're going to have to go back to Congress and ask for the money again. That was a source of frustration. The Biden administration, incoming officials saying, you know, that the outgoing administration is tying their hands, but that is the situation. This has already happened. There's no way to undo it at this point, and it does enable Republicans, at the end of the day, once this bill is signed into law, they'll be able to say, well, it wasn't really a $900 billion relief bill. It was actually something more along the lines of $450 billion in new spending at the end of the day, because they repurposed so much of the money from the CARES Act. That was very important to Senate Leader Mitch McConnell and some of his conservative colleagues who believe that the federal government has already spent too much money dealing with this crisis, and that it is going to end up adding to the debt in an unsustainable way. And so, you know, that's the way that they are going to be selling this huge deal, even if it does cause some headaches for the Federal Reserve.
So you reported that a provision called the Restaurant Act may actually be left out of this. And I know a lot of people will say, well, restaurants are already covered by, you know, various small business initiatives. But the thing about restaurants is, and when it comes to the Paycheck Protection Program in particular, is a lot of restaurant owners had to spend money on other things, not paychecks, in order to stay afloat. They were affected in more unique ways, I think, than a lot of other businesses. And so they're arguing we need a whole separate thing. Why is there a possibility that this could be left out?
You know, I think it's just a money issue. It's not the only thing that is getting left out here. When you're talking about $900 billion, which is, you know, still a large amount of money, but it's not, for example, the 2.4 trillion, rather, big difference, that the Democrats had wanted. So when you pare it back to $900 billion, there are some things that are going to stay and some things that are going to go. For example, Democrats wanted $1 trillion alone in funding for state and local governments. These governments are really in a crunch. They are hemorrhaging money, and they are looking at the very real possibility of having to lay off frontline workers. The state of Hawaii, for example, is going to be furloughing teachers a couple of days a month to save money. Imagine the strain that teachers and students are already under, and now you're going to furlough teachers a couple of days a month. What kind of impact is that going to have on learning? So these are the very difficult decisions that state and local governments are making now, because unlike the federal government, they can't borrow money. They've got to meet their budgets. And so, that $1 trillion is not going to go out either. So, there are some very major trade-offs that are being made here, and restaurants, it appears, are one of the casualties of those trade-offs.
Wow, Nancy, I mean, that one example alone with the teachers, all I keep thinking is, even if we pass something, there's going to be plenty of cleanup that needs to be done for months to come moving forward. This is really just the beginning of the conversation. Nancy Cordes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.